My name's is Marin Holloway. I'm 41 years old. 3 weeks after my mother's funeral, I found out she'd been asking a small white speaker for her nightstand questions about me. For 9 years. Every night. Sometimes twice a night. She never asked me any of them to my face. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. My mother and I spoke on Sundays. We had Christmas. We had birthdays. We had a relationship most people would call close. I called her on the way home from work. She sent my daughter cards with $2 bills in them. When she got sick, I drove down on weekends. When she died, I gave the eulogy, and I meant every word of it. I gave a eulogy for a woman I did not know. I'm an archivist. That is my actual job. I work at the Linden Crossing Historical Society, and I spend my days transcribing the voices of dead people into searchable text, Civil War letters read aloud by their great-grandchildren. Factory workers describing the day the plant closed. Widows describing husbands 40 years gone. I have spent 15 years preserving other people's truths so they don't disappear. And I missed my own mother's, sitting on her nightstand, plugged into the wall, for 9 years. The speaker was an off-brand thing I bought her in 2016 because she said the house was too quiet after Dad died. I set it up myself. I gave her the password. I taught her to ask it about the weather, about recipes, about whether the Browns had won. She used it for all of that. She also used it for something else. There are 4,712 stored audio queries on my mother's account. I've listened to 311 of them. I have not slept properly in 19 days. My husband doesn't know yet. My brother doesn't know yet. The only person who knows is my mother's neighbor, Ruth, who handed me the speaker the day after the funeral and said, "Honey, I think she meant for you to have this one." Ruth knew. Ruth knew before I did. This is Confession Chronicles. If stories about the secrets families keep until it's too late are the kind you can't scroll past, subscribe. I won't ask again. I have a lot to tell you, and I need to say it the way it happened. Because what I did with those recordings, they didn't expect that. Neither did I. The thing nobody tells you about losing a parent is that the grief isn't shaped like grief. It's shaped like paperwork. The first 2 weeks after my mother died, I spent in a haze of forms. Death certificates, the funeral director's invoice, the bank that needed 7 different signatures because she'd opened her checking in 1974, and apparently that requires a notary, a priest, and the blood of a goat. My brother Calvin handled almost none of it. Calvin lives an hour and a half away in Dayton, and he had, in his words, a lot on at work. So I drove down to Linden Crossing every Saturday. I sorted her clothes, I canceled her cable. I sat in her kitchen and ate the casseroles the neighbors kept dropping off, and I cried at strange moments. Like when I found her grocery list on the fridge with buttermilk written in her handwriting and realized she was never going to use it. I want to tell you something about my mother before I tell you what she did. Because if I don't, you're going to think this is one of those stories. It's not. When I was 9, I had a fever of 103 for 2 days. Strep, eventually. But the first night, before they knew, I was shivering so hard I couldn't speak. And my mother sat on the bathroom floor with me from midnight until almost 6 in the morning, wringing out a washcloth in ice water and singing the same song. The same song, on a loop, for 6 hours. She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I was watching her through my eyelashes, and in between verses, she kept whispering the same thing to herself. Please don't be like me. Please don't be like me. Please don't be like me. I have spent 32 years trying to understand what she meant. That's the woman I'm telling you about. Not a monster. Not a villain in the way people use that word. A woman who once wept on a bathroom floor and prayed her daughter wouldn't inherit whatever she was carrying. She was beloved. You should know that too. Choir alto, brought casseroles to widowers. 3 different women came up to me at the funeral and told me, with the kind of certainty that brooks no contradiction, that I was the luckiest daughter in Linden Crossing. Your mother talked about you constantly, they said. She was so proud. I smiled. I nodded. I shook their hands, and I thought, that's strange, because she never told me. Calvin gave a beautiful eulogy. He talked about her laugh. He talked about her gardening. He talked about how she always said I was the strong one and he was the soft one. Everyone in the church nodded. People came up to me afterward and said, "He's right, you are the strong one." I want to confess something here, because I told you this story would be honest. I waited too long. I knew my mother was lonely. I knew she was lonely from the moment my father died in 2016, and I called her every Sunday like a duty, not a desire. I visited on holidays. I sent flowers on her birthday. I told myself that was enough because I was tired, because I had a daughter, because Linden Crossing is a 2-hour drive, that begins 3 in winter, because. And there is a small ugly part of me, the part I do not say out loud at parties, that felt something like relief when she died. Not relief that she was gone, relief that the obligation had an end, that I could stop feeling guilty on Sundays. I've been sitting with that feeling for 3 weeks now. It has not improved. There were warnings. There are always warnings. Looking back, I see them. The first warning was Christmas of 2019. My mother gave Calvin a check for $4,000 to help with his furnace. She gave me a sweater. When I asked her gently about the difference, she said, "Oh, you don't need help. You've always landed on your feet." I told myself she meant it as a compliment. Maybe I was overthinking it. The second warning was my daughter's baptism in 2018. My mother didn't come. She said her back was bothering her. Calvin told me later, in a way that was meant to be reassuring, that she'd driven to his son's hockey game that same weekend. I told myself she'd forgotten the conflict. Maybe I was overthinking it. The third warning was the way she said, "I love you" on the phone. Always the same way. Always at the very end after she'd already said goodbye in a rushed voice, like she was embarrassed. I noticed it for years. I never asked her about it. Maybe I was overthinking it. You see what I'm telling you? I had information. I chose not to look at it. That's on me. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that for 9 years, my mother had been looking at it for me, out loud, to a small white machine on her nightstand. And the machine had been keeping every word. It was a Thursday, 3 weeks to the day after the funeral. October 17th. The sky was the color of wet concrete, and the leaves had started to turn but hadn't fallen yet. That ugly in-between week when nothing looks alive, but nothing has the decency to be dead. I drove down to Linden Crossing alone. Theo had Sadie. I needed to start packing up my mother's bedroom, and I needed to do it without anyone watching me cry over a hairbrush. I let myself in with the key I'd had since I was 16. The house smelled like her. That was the worst part. Lemon pledge and the particular brand of hand cream she used, and underneath it all, faintly, the cigarettes she'd quit in 1998 but never fully left the walls. I went upstairs to her bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and I started. Her closet first. Her sweaters folded the way her mother had taught her, the way she had tried to teach me, the way I never learned. Her shoes lined up by season, a box of letters from my father from when he was stationed in Germany in 1972, tied with a ribbon that had gone gray. I was doing fine. I was managing. Then I turned to the nightstand. There was the lamp. There was the alarm clock that hadn't worked since 2014. There was a paperback novel with a bookmark a third of the way through, which broke something in me I did not have time to examine. And there was the speaker. The little white plastic cylinder I had set up for her 9 years ago. I'd assumed someone would have unplugged it. I'd assumed it was off. It wasn't. The blue ring at the top was glowing, faintly, the way it does when it's listening but no one is talking. Listen to an empty room, listening to her empty bed, listening to nothing. I sat down on the floor in front of it. I don't know why. I think because if I'd stayed standing, I would have fallen. I said her name out loud. "Mom." The speaker blinked. Then a pleasant female voice, the one she'd chosen, said, "I'm sorry, I didn't catch that." I started crying, not the dignified kind, the other kind. The kind where you don't recognize the sound coming out of your own chest. I cried into my hands on the carpet of my dead mother's bedroom for what was probably 20 minutes and might have been an hour. When I could see again, I picked up my phone. I logged into her account, the one I'd set up for her in 2016, the one she'd never bothered to change. And I opened the activity log out of nothing more than curiosity, the way you'd flip through someone's calendar to see what they'd been planning. There were 4,712 entries. I assumed it was junk. Weather, recipes, brown scores. I scrolled to the most recent one. It was dated 3 days before she died. The transcript read, "How do you tell a daughter you spent her whole life loving her wrong?" I read that sentence 4 times before I understood what I was reading. My hands were shaking. Not from anger. From shock. Real shock. The kind that comes with cold sweat and a ringing in your ears and the certainty that something has just happened that you cannot unhappen. I scrolled up to the one before it. 5 days before her death. Is 41 too old for a mother to start over? The one before that. A week earlier. Do most daughters call? Or is it normal that I'm the one who calls? I started scrolling faster. I couldn't help it. The dates were going backwards and the questions were getting longer, and I felt like I was falling down a staircase in the dark. How do you ask for forgiveness when you can't admit what you did? Why didn't I go to her wedding? Why didn't I go to her baptism? Why is it easier to love my son? When did she stop being my baby? Why does looking at her make me see my mother? I want you to understand. I had been on the floor of that bedroom for maybe 40 minutes at this point. I had not eaten since breakfast. I had a casserole defrosting in the kitchen downstairs that Ruth Vandermeer had dropped off the week before, and that I had been meaning to return the dish for. And I was watching my mother who said, "I love you" in a rushed voice, at the end of phone calls, ask a piece of plastic the questions she had never asked me. I scrolled to the very first one. The very first thing she had ever said to that speaker, after she'd asked it about the weather and the Browns' score, and whether vinegar was good for cleaning windows. The date was March 9th, 2016. 6 weeks after I'd set it up for her, 2 months after my father died. The transcript read, "Is it possible to love a child the right way if you didn't have a mother who did?" I sat on the floor of that bedroom and I made a sound I don't have a word for. Somewhere between a laugh and a sob and an apology to no one. Every part of me wanted to throw the speaker against the wall. I wanted to take a hammer to it. I wanted to drive to the river and drop it off the Linden Crossing Bridge and pretend I'd never seen inside of her head. I didn't. I put it in my purse. I went downstairs. I put the casserole back in the freezer. I locked the house. I drove back to Cleveland with the speaker on the passenger seat, and the whole way home I kept glancing at it like it was a person, like it was going to speak. Halfway home, I had to pull over at a gas station outside Mansfield because I couldn't see the road through what was happening to my face. I sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes. A man in a Carhartt jacket knocked on my window to ask if I was okay. I said yes, I wasn't. When I finally got home, Theo was at the door. Sadie was already asleep. He took one look at me and he said, "What happened?" I said, "I don't know how to say it." He said, "Try." I said, "My mother had been asking a machine about me for 9 years, every night." He didn't say anything. He just put his arms around me and he held me up, which was good because for the first time since the funeral, I was not the strong one. For the first time, I didn't have to be. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or really for the next 3 weeks. I told Theo I needed to listen, all of it, every recording. He didn't argue. He's an emergency room physician, and he has spent his whole adult life watching people insist on doing things that hurt them, because the alternative is not knowing. He poured me a glass of wine and he said, "You'll do what you need to do. I'll keep Sadie out of the room." That first night, I made myself a system because that's what I do. I'm an archivist. I make systems. I set up the speaker in the corner of our home office. I plugged in noise-canceling headphones. I opened a fresh spreadsheet, date, time, exact transcript, my emotional response in 5 words or fewer, any context I could reconstruct from what was happening in our family on that day. The kind of intake form I'd use at work for a donated estate of letters. I treated my dead mother like a collection. I tell you this because I want you to understand. I was trying to keep myself sane by pretending this was a job. It worked for about 90 minutes. The first 100 recordings were innocent. Weather, is it going to rain on Tuesday? Recipes. How do you make pie crust without lard? The Browns score, which she had never cared about until my father died, and which she started asking about because it was the thing he used to know. But then, woven in between the practical questions, I started finding the other kind. March 14th, 2016, 11:47 p.m. Is it normal for a mother to feel relief when her grown daughter leaves? March 22nd, 2016, 2:03 a.m. How do you stop being angry at someone for something they don't know they did? April 8th, 2016, 9:51 p.m. Is it too late to be a different kind of mother at 66? I went through them in chronological order. I refused to skip ahead. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it the way it had happened, the way she had lived it, one night at a time. The pattern emerged quickly. My mother used that speaker the way other people use a priest, or a therapist, or a friend. Except she didn't have any of those, or she had them and didn't use them, and so she used a machine that couldn't talk back. I think I understand now why she chose it. The machine couldn't tell her she was being dramatic. The machine couldn't tell her father, Your wife is asking strange questions. The machine couldn't run into her at the grocery stores and look at her with pity. The machine had no opinion. It just listened. And it forgot, which she didn't know, was a lie. It didn't forget anything. I want to tell you about the first time I tried to stop. It was the fourth night. I'd gotten to about August of 2016, and I was exhausted, and I'd just listened to a recording where my mother asked, "Why does my daughter look at me the way I looked at my mother?" And I closed my laptop and I went downstairs and I tried to make dinner like a normal person. I'd been chopping onions for about 3 minutes when I started crying so hard I cut my thumb. Theo took the knife away. He sat me down at the table. He said, "You need to stop. You don't have to know all of it." And I said, "You don't understand. I've spent 15 years preserving other people's voices because no one cared enough to listen to them when they were alive. I'm not going to be the woman who didn't listen to her own mother." He looked at me for a long time. And then he said something that I have not stopped thinking about. He said, "Marin, your mother had 9 years to call you. She had a phone." I knew he was right. I kept listening anyway. I told Calvin about a week in. I had to. I couldn't carry it alone anymore. I called him on a Sunday afternoon and I tried to explain. "Calvin," I said, "I found something at Mom's house." "What kind of something?" "Recordings on the speaker I set up for her. She'd been asking it questions about me for years." There was a long pause on the other end. Then Calvin laughed, not cruelly, the way you laugh when you don't know what else to do. "Mar," he said, "that's a privacy thing. You shouldn't be listening to that." I felt the floor tilt. "Calvin, she's dead." "Still, Calvin, there are 4,700 of them, Marin. Mom did her best, you know that. Whatever she said to that thing, leave it alone. Some things you're not supposed to know." I sat with that sentence for a long time after we hung up. Some things you're not supposed to know. That's the sentence Calvin built his whole life out of. That's how my family functioned. My father drank for 40 years, and we didn't say it's because some things you're not supposed to know. My mother's mother killed herself in 1971, and we never asked how because some things you're not supposed to know. My mother loved Calvin in a way she did not love me, and I had felt it in my bones since I was 4 years old, and we never said it out loud because some things you're not supposed to know. I sat at my kitchen table after that phone call and I made a decision. Quietly, the way I make most of my decisions. I was going to know. I went back to the recordings. The middle months of 2017 were when it got hard. That was the year I got married. Calvin gave a toast. Calvin gave a beautiful toast. He talked about how Mom and Dad had raised us to love big and forgive fast and how proud Mom was that day. My mother had not given a toast at my wedding. She'd said she was too nervous in front of crowds. I found the recording from the night of my wedding, June 24th, 2017, 1:14 a.m. The transcript read, "Why couldn't I be happy for her today? What is wrong with me?" I sat with that one for a long time too, because here's the thing. I had spent 10 years convinced my mother didn't love my husband, that she thought Theo wasn't good enough, that she'd been disappointed in my choice. That recording told me something different. That recording told me she'd hated herself on the night of my wedding for not being able to feel the joy she was supposed to feel. That she'd known, in the moment, that something was wrong with how she was reacting. And that instead of asking herself why, or asking me why, or asking literally any human being why, she'd asked a piece of plastic at 1:14 in the morning and gone to bed. Around the second week, Ruth Vandermeer called me. Ruth was my mother's next-door neighbor for 31 years. The woman who had handed me the speaker the day after the funeral and said, "Honey, I think she meant for you to have this one." "Marin," she said, "how are you holding up?" "Ruth, I have to ask you something. Go ahead." "Did you know?" There was a pause. "Honey, I didn't know what was in it. But I knew your mother spent every night talking to that thing. I'd be sitting on my porch in summer and I'd hear her through the window. Not the words, just the sound. She'd be talking and talking like she had company, and then I'd realize she didn't. Why didn't you tell me?" "Honey," Ruth said, "would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was a busybody old woman?" I didn't answer her. I didn't have to. "Marin," she said, "your mother loved you. I want you to know that. She just didn't know how to do it out loud. Some women of our generation, we weren't taught how. We were taught to feed people and keep our houses clean and bite our tongues. The other things, the saying it out loud things, those were considered showing off. I told Ruth about Calvin's reaction, the some things you're not supposed to know. Ruth was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your brother's scared, Marin. Boys raised by women like your mother grow up scared of what's underneath. They spend their whole lives keeping the lid on. You're the one who took the lid off. He's going to be angry at you for a while. That's not because you're wrong." I kept listening. I started to notice patterns I had missed in the first pass. She asked about Calvin, too. Not as often. The questions were different. Is Calvin happy? Does Calvin's wife seem okay? Should I send Calvin money this month? The questions about Calvin were maintenance questions, logistics. The questions about me were existential. Why does she look at me like that? Why can't I tell her what I want to tell her? Why is she the one I'm afraid of? That last one stopped me cold. December 3rd, 2019, 10:47 p.m. Why is my own daughter the one I'm afraid of? My mother, afraid of me, the strong one, the one who'd left for college and come back wrong, the one who called every Sunday like a duty. I was the thing she was afraid of. I sat with that for 3 days before I could listen to anything else. In that gap, I tried to remember. I tried to remember the version of myself I had been in my mother's presence. Was I cold to her? Was I judgmental? Had I made my disappointment so loud, without ever saying a word, that she had spent 10 years afraid of my voice on the other end of the phone? I called my Aunt June, my mother's estranged sister. She lived in Florida, and we hadn't spoken in 5 years. June picked up on the second ring. When I told her who it was, she made a small sound, like a held breath releasing. "Marin, honey, I've been waiting for you to call. Why?" "Because I knew sooner or later you'd want to ask me the questions your mother wouldn't answer." I asked her about my grandmother, my mother's mother, the one who died before I was born, the one we never talked about, the one whose photograph my mother kept in a drawer face down. June was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your grandmother killed herself in 1971. Your mother found the body. She was 17 years old. There was a note. Your mother kept it. I don't think she ever showed it to anyone. Not even your father. She was afraid of what it would do if she ever said any of it out loud." I sat in my kitchen, and I thought about a 17-year-old girl finding her mother's body in 1971 in a small town in Ohio, where you weren't supposed to talk about it, and then growing up to be a mother herself, and then spending 40 years terrified she was passing the thing on, and then, when her husband died and the house went quiet, finally finding a machine she could ask the question to. Is it possible to love a child the right way if you didn't have a mother who did? I started to understand the question. I went back to the recordings. I was different now. Something had shifted. I wasn't an archivist anymore. I wasn't preserving a collection. I was reading a letter that had been written to me, in fragments over 9 years, by a woman who didn't know how to address it. The envelope had finally arrived. Around the third week, I hit the wall. I'd gotten up to February of 2022. There was a recording from the morning of my daughter's 5th birthday. "Why does she let her daughter touch her face? I never let mine do that. I don't think I knew you were allowed." I closed the laptop. I went and got Sadie out of her bed. She was warm and half asleep, and she smelled like the lavender shampoo I'd put in her hair the night before. She put her hand on my cheek and she said, "Mommy, you're cold." I held her for an hour. She fell back asleep against my collarbone. I thought, my mother never did this. Not once that I can remember. Not because she didn't want to. Because she didn't know she was allowed. I sat with that, and then I did something I had not done since the funeral. I asked myself out loud in our home office at 2 a.m, what do I want? Not what I owed. Not what the recordings deserved. Not what my mother was trying to say. What did I want? I wanted my brother to know. That was the first answer. I wanted Calvin to stop telling himself the story that Mom did her best, because that story was a wall, and behind the wall was a real woman my brother had also failed to see, and the wall was hurting him too, even if he didn't know it. But I knew Calvin. I knew if I called him and tried to explain, he would do what he always did. Laugh it off, change the subject, hang up early, send a follow-up text 3 days later about something unrelated. I needed him in a room, I needed him at a table, and I needed him to hear one recording, just one, the right one. I went back to the spreadsheet. I was looking for a specific entry. I knew it was there. I had heard it on the second night and I had marked it because something in me had known, even then, that it was the one. August 19th, 2021, 11:32 p.m. I copied the transcript. I copied the audio file. I authenticated the timestamp using the same protocol I use at work for donated estate materials. I made 3 backups. Then I called Calvin. Calvin, I said, I need you to come to my house Saturday for dinner, just you. Not the kids, not Becca. Why? Because I'm asking. He paused. Mar, if this is about that speaker thing, it's not about the speaker. That was true and also not. The speaker was just the medium. The speaker was the messenger. The thing the speaker had recorded, that was what mattered. Okay, Calvin said, Saturday. I hung up, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I slept 8 hours. Saturday came slowly. The whole week I was building, quietly, the way a librarian builds a finding aid for an archive that's about to be opened to the public for the first time. I went to my mother's house alone on Tuesday. I had 2 reasons. The first was that there was a tin box on the top shelf of her closet behind her dress that I had noticed during the first pass and had not opened. The second was that I needed to be in that room one more time before Saturday. The box was small. Green painted tin, rusted at the corners, the kind of box my grandfather might have used to keep nails. It was locked. I broke the lock with a screwdriver. I didn't even feel bad about it. Inside, there were 3 things. A photograph of a woman I didn't recognize but knew immediately, my grandmother, the one we didn't talk about, in a Sunday dress, holding a baby who must have been my mother, in front of a house I had never seen. A wedding ring I had also never seen, and a folded piece of paper, the creases gone soft from being folded and refolded for 50 years. The note was 3 sentences long. Lorraine, I'm sorry. I couldn't be the mother you needed. I hope you'll be different. I know you will. Mama. I sat on the floor of my mother's closet for a long time after that. My grandmother had not, as June had implied, simply left a suicide note. She had left a letter to my mother, to the 17-year-old who found her. The letter was an apology and a prophecy. I hope you'll be different. I know you will. My mother had carried that sentence for 51 years. I hope you'll be different. I know you will. And every night, in the dark, after my father died and the house went quiet, she had whispered to a piece of plastic on her nightstand, is it possible to love a child the right way if you didn't have a mother who did? She had been asking the speaker to tell her she had been different, to tell her she had broken the line, to tell her she had not become her mother. She had been asking the wrong listener. I put the note back in the box. I put the box in my bag. I locked the house. I drove home in silence, no radio, no podcast, just the road and the fact of what I now knew. That night, I went back to the recording I'd flagged for Calvin. The one I was going to play him on Saturday. I needed to listen to it again with everything I now knew. August 19th, 2021, 11:32 p.m. I'll tell you what's on it. My mother, crying audibly in a way I had never heard her cry. Not the choked up Christmas crying, not the funeral crying, the other kind. The kind that comes out of a person when no one is watching and no one is supposed to know. And she says, and I am going to give you her exact words because they have not left my head since the first time I heard them. She says, why is the strong one always the one we starve? Why did I do to her what my mother did to me? I told myself was being fair. I told myself she didn't need it. I told myself she had everything. I gave the boy the love and I gave the girl the chores and I called it equal and I knew it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. And now she calls me on Sundays and I can hear it in her voice. She knows it wasn't. She's known her whole life. And I don't know how to tell her, I'm sorry. I don't know how to tell her, I see you. I see what I did. I am so afraid of what I see. There's a pause, long, maybe 30 seconds. Then she says, cancel that. Don't answer. I don't want to know if it's too late. And the recording ends. I had to listen to it 11 times before I could write down the transcript without crying. I want to tell you what I felt when I first heard it. I don't have a clean word for it. Part of me was vindicated, the part that had spent 40 years feeling unseen and being told I was imagining it. Part of me was destroyed, because she had known the whole time and she had not been able to say it. And part of me, the part I am still negotiating with, was furious. Because what good is a confession to a machine? She had known what she did. She had named it, to a piece of plastic, in the middle of the night. And then she had told the piece of plastic to delete the question, which the piece of plastic had not deleted because she didn't understand how it worked. She had spent her whole life teaching me that the truth was a private burden you carried alone until it killed you. And then she had recorded the only honest sentence she ever spoke to anyone about me, and addressed it to no one. There is a moment I have to tell you about now. The hardest part of this whole thing. It was about 3 days before Calvin was supposed to come over. 2 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. I went down to the kitchen for water and I saw on the counter the green tin box with my grandmother's note inside. And something in me cracked. I picked up the box. I picked up the speaker, which I had carried from the office. I put both of them in my car. I put on a coat over my pajamas. I drove to my mother's house. I sat in her driveway with the engine running. I had a hammer in the passenger footwell. I'd grabbed it from the garage on the way out, without thinking, because part of me had known what I was going to do before the rest of me caught up. I was going to take the hammer to the speaker. I was going to take the hammer to the box. I was going to take everything I had learned in the last 3 weeks, and I was going to make it disappear, because if I made it disappear, I got to keep the mother I had been raised to perform grief for. I got to keep the eulogy I gave. I got to keep the version of my childhood where I had been overreacting, and Calvin had been right, and Mom had done her best. I was so tired. I cannot tell you how tired I was. I picked up the hammer, I turned in my seat. I looked at the speaker on the passenger floor, and a small voice from the back seat said, "Mommy, who are you mad at?" I had forgotten Sadie was in the car. I had buckled her into her booster seat at 1:45 in the morning because I didn't want to leave her in the house alone, and I had not woken Theo because I had not wanted to explain. And I had driven my 7-year-old daughter 2 hours through the dark with a hammer in the footwell, and I had forgotten she was there. I want you to understand, I am not the woman who forgets her daughter is in the car. I am not the woman who drives in the middle of the night with a hammer. I am an archivist. I keep records. I am responsible, but I had become someone else in the last 3 weeks. I had become someone with a hammer. I turned around. I looked at Sadie. Her face was small in the back seat, her cheeks pink from the cold, the way she gets when she sleeps. She was holding the stuffed rabbit she's had since she was 2. "Mommy," she said again, "who are you mad at?" I sat there in the dark with the hammer in my hand and the speaker on the floor and the green tin box on the seat, and my daughter in the back, and I understood something for the first time. If I destroyed the recordings, I was teaching Sadie exactly what my mother had taught me. That the truth is, a private burden women carry alone until it kills them. That you stuff it in a tin box on the top shelf of a closet behind a wedding dress, and you hope your daughter finds it after you're dead. Because you cannot, for the life of you, hand it to her while you're still breathing. I was going to break the line, or I was going to continue it. There was no third option. I put the hammer down. I climbed into the back seat. I put my arms around my daughter. I said, "I'm not mad, baby. I'm sad. Sometimes when grown-ups are sad, it looks like mad. I'm sorry I scared you." She said, "Are you sad about Grandma?" I said, "Yes," she said. "Me too." I sat in the back seat of my car in my dead mother's driveway and I cried into my daughter's hair. And Sadie patted my arm the way I had patted her arm 1,000 times when she'd had a bad dream. And after a while, I drove us home and put her back in bed. And Theo never knew, until I told him a week later what I had almost done. The wall came down that night, not in a dramatic way, not in a sudden way, just quietly. The way a door that's been stuck for years finally clicks open. I wasn't going to destroy anything. I wasn't going to bury anything. I was going to do what I had been trained, professionally, to do. I was going to put the truth in the right room, at the right time, to the right listener. The right listener was my brother. Calvin came on Saturday at 6. He brought a bottle of wine, which surprised me because he doesn't usually bring things. Theo had taken Sadie to her grandparents for the night on my request. The house was quiet. I had set the dining room table with my mother's china, which Calvin would notice but not mention, because that was the kind of detail Calvin had spent his whole life pretending not to notice. We ate dinner, we talked about his kids, we talked about his job. We did not talk about Mom. I cleared the plates, I made coffee, I brought out the speaker, I set it on the table between us. Calvin looked at the speaker. He looked at me. His face did the thing it had done since he was 9 years old, the thing where the corners of his mouth went tight and the rest of him went still. "Mar, I'm not going to ask you to listen to all of them. I'm not even going to ask you to listen to 10. I'm going to ask you to listen to 1, 90 seconds. That's it. And then I want you to tell me what you hear." "Mar, I told you." "I don't want, Calvin, I have asked you for almost nothing in 41 years. I am asking you for this. It's 90 seconds. I stared at me. I did not yell. I did not cry. I just stayed in my chair. He nodded. I pressed play. I watched my brother's face for 90 seconds. I have watched the faces of a lot of people listening to the voices of their dead. It's part of my job. You see something pass across a face during those moments that doesn't pass at any other time. A kind of falling, a kind of waking up. Calvin's face did both. The recording ended. Cancel that. Don't answer. I don't want to know if it's too late. Silence. Calvin's eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them. He was looking at the speaker. He said, "Play it again." I played it again. When it ended the second time, he put his face in his hands, not crying exactly, just leaning. Like he needed his hands to hold his head up. He said into his palms, "I didn't know. I know you didn't. I thought you were the one who got the most of her. Because you were her girl. I thought I was the leftover. I had not expected that. I want you to understand. I had spent 41 years convinced Calvin was the favorite. He had spent 41 years convinced I was. And neither of us had known the other one felt that way because in our family, some things you're not supposed to know." We sat at that table for another 2 hours. I didn't play any other recordings. I didn't need to. The one had done what one was supposed to do. He asked me about the box. I showed him the note. He read it 3 times. He said, "She showed me a picture of Grandma once. When I was about 10, she put it back in the drawer face down, and she said, 'Don't ask.' I never asked again. I know, why didn't she tell us?" "Calvin, she didn't know how." He nodded. He said, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "I don't want you to do anything. I want you to know. That's all. I want you to stop telling yourself she did her best, because the version of her that did her best, that's a version. The real one. The real one knew she was failing and didn't know how to stop. That's different. That matters. And I want you to know it because I think you've been carrying her wrong, too." He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Mar, for what? For all the times you said something, and I called it dramatic. For all the times you brought up Mom and I changed the subject. For the eulogy. I should have written it about who she actually was. I wrote it about who I wanted her to be." I reached across the table. I put my hand on his hand. He let me. It was the first time we had touched, voluntarily, in maybe 10 years. This is the part of the story where, if this were the movie version, my brother and I would have cried together and forgiven everything, and walked into the sunset arm in arm. This is not the movie version. What happened was, Calvin went home. He called me 3 days later and told me he'd listened to the recording again in his car twice and that he was going to start therapy. He said it like he was admitting to a crime. I said, "Good." He said, "I think I have a lot to figure out." I said, "Me too." That was it. That was the turn. It was quiet. It was inside. There were no fireworks. There was no public reckoning. There was just my brother in his car in Dayton, listening to our dead mother say this sentence she had been unable to say for 50 years, and finally hearing it. Sometimes the power move isn't a speech. Sometimes it isn't a lawsuit. Sometimes it isn't the dramatic confrontation at the holiday table. Sometimes it's 90 seconds at your kitchen table with the right person, with the truth. That's what I did. I had spent 15 years preserving other people's truths. For the first time in my life, I had preserved my own. The thing I didn't expect was the phone calls. I had thought, in some quiet, stupid corner of my mind, that the Saturday with Calvin was the end, that I would put the speaker in a drawer, that I would close the spreadsheet, that I would go back to my life, and Calvin would go back to his, and we would, between us, hold the secret of who our mother had really been. That is not what happened. Word travels in families. I don't know exactly what Calvin told his wife, Becca, but a week after our dinner, Becca called me. She'd been Becca for 16 years. She was practical, kind of sister-in-law who sent birthday cards on time and didn't ask intrusive questions. "Marin," she said, "Calvin's been different this week," he told me. "About the recording. I don't want to overstep, but I think you should know. He's not sleeping. I know what that's like. He's also been talking about your dad." I sat up straighter. "What about him?" "He's been saying things he's never said before, about how your dad treated him, how your dad ignored him. He'd never said any of this to me, Mar, not in 16 years of marriage." And now suddenly, she stopped. "Becca, he's allowed to. Whatever he needs to say, he's allowed." "I know. I wanted you to know. I think what you did was good. I think you might have saved him from something. I don't know what." I thanked her. I got off the phone, I went into the office, and I sat in front of the speaker for a long time. The second call was from my Aunt June. 3 days later, I heard from Calvin. That surprised me. Calvin and June had not spoken since my father's funeral. He called you? He called me. He had questions about your grandmother. He'd never asked before. I told him everything I told you. He asked if I could come up for Thanksgiving. I had not thought about Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was supposed to be the first one without Mom, and I had been quietly dreading it the way you dread a wound you know is going to ache when the weather changes. Are you going to come? If you'll have me. June, of course. She paused. Marin. Your mother and I stopped talking in 2009. You never asked why. I assumed it was complicated. It was. But it was also simple. I told her the last time we talked that she was doing to you what our mother had done to her, and she hung up on me, and she never called me again. And I always wondered if I should have said it differently. Or said it sooner, or said it at all. I closed my eyes. June, I'm glad you said it. Are you? Yes. Because she heard it. She didn't act on it, but she heard it. And then she went and asked a machine the same question for 9 years in the dark. You weren't wrong to say it. She just didn't know what to do with it once you did. June started crying on the other end of the phone, the quiet kind, the kind women of my mother's generation do. She said, thank you for telling me that. I said, thank you for trying. The third call was the hardest. It was Father Donovan Ashe, my mother's priest, 3 weeks after the dinner with Calvin. Mrs. Holloway, Pacifer, forgive the intrusion. I'd like to speak with you about your mother. Father, of course. He had a soft voice. He chose his words like he was paying for each one. Your mother came to confession every week for the last 6 years of her life. I cannot tell you what she said. You understand. I do. But I want to tell you that she came. I want to tell you that she came specifically, every week, and that what she came to confess was always, in some form, the same thing. And I want to tell you that I asked her, many times, if she had spoken to the person about whom she was confessing, and she always said no. And I told her every time that confession was good but reconciliation was the harder grace and the necessary one. I held very by stay said, she tried, Marin. I am telling you this because I am breaking no seal. She told me she tried. She would pick up the phone and not be able to dial. She would draft a letter and burn it. She told me once that she had practiced what she would say to you in the bathroom mirror for an hour and had not been able to do it. She said her mother had taken the words out of her when she was 17 and that she could not get them back. I closed my eyes. Father, did she ever say what she would have said if she'd been able to? He was quiet. Then he said, she said she would have told you that she saw you, that she had always seen you, that she had loved you more than she had known how to show, and that she was sorry she had given the easy love to your brother and the hard love to you, and that she had known, even as she did it, that it would not be possible to undo. I cried for a long time after that phone call. Not the destroyed crying, a different kind, a kind I did not know I had in me. The release kind. I want to tell you about what happened with the recordings. I had a decision to make. I had 9 years of audio of a private woman's most private questions sitting on my laptop. I could keep them, I could delete them, I could do something else. I did something else. I made a single edited file, 47 minutes long, the recordings that mattered, the ones where my mother had named the thing she was carrying, even if only to a machine. I authenticated it. I encrypted it. I put a copy in my safe deposit box and a copy in the Historical Society archive under my own name, sealed for 50 years. Not because I was going to share it. Because I needed someone, someday, to be able to verify that it was real. My mother had been a woman who knew that she had not been the person the eulogies said she was, that she had been more. The rest of the recordings, the weather, the recipes, the brown scores, the quiet weeknight questions about whether vinegar cleans windows, I kept in a folder on my desktop. I open it sometimes when I miss her voice and I need to hear her ask about something normal. I deleted nothing. I want to tell you what Calvin did 3 months after our dinner. He drove down to Linden Crossing on a Sunday. He went to my mother's grave. He stayed there for an hour, alone. And then, and this is the part I did not see coming, he drove to the cemetery's office and he ordered a second headstone. Not for himself. Not for our mother. For our grandmother, whose grave, it turned out, was unmarked. Because in 1971, in a small town in Ohio, the family of a woman who had died the way our grandmother had died had not been permitted, by the community and by themselves, to give her a stone. Calvin paid for it. He chose the inscription. He asked me to come down for the small ceremony when it was placed. I went. June came, Calvin's family came, Theo and Sadie came. The inscription read, "Beloved, forgiven, remembered." Calvin stood at the foot of the new stone and he said, "Mom, I hope you can rest now, your mother can." I cannot tell you how I felt in that moment. I do not have a word for it. The closest I can come is, the line broke. The line that had run from my grandmother to my mother to me to Sadie, the line of women carrying truths in tin boxes on top shelves of closets, the line broke, out loud, in a cemetery. On a Tuesday in November. It broke because I had taken the lid off and because Calvin had been brave enough to look, and because my mother, in the only way she knew how, had left us the map. She had asked a machine the questions her whole life, and the machine had kept them, so that her daughter could find them, so that her son could hear them, so that the line could break. I think, and this is the only part of all of this where I will allow myself to be unscientific, I think she did mean for me to find them, not consciously, not the way you plan a will. But somewhere in some deep part of herself, she knew the speaker was recording. She knew her daughter was the one who had set it up. She knew I would eventually come for her things. She left me the recordings the same way her mother had left her the note. I hope you'll be different. I know you will. She just couldn't sign her name to it. It has been 14 months since my mother died. 11 months since I found the recordings, 9 months since the dinner with Calvin. I want to tell you where things are now. Calvin and I talk every other Sunday. Sometimes we talk for 10 minutes, sometimes for an hour. We don't talk about Mom most of the time. We talk about kids, about my work, about whether the Browns will ever do anything. But we know, both of us, that we can talk about Mom if we need to. And that is new, and that is everything. He's still in therapy. He told me last month that he has started, very quietly, telling his daughter, who is 12, who reminds him of me when I was that age, that he sees her. He just says it. "I see you, Lily," out loud, the way our mother could not. "Lily," he said, looked at him like he was crazy the first time. The second time she laughed. The third time she said, "I see you too, Dad." That's how a line breaks. In sentences, a 12-year-old laughs at the first time and answers the third. June and I talk every week. She told me last month that she wants to write down her memories of my grandmother. The real ones, not the permitted ones, so that Sadie will have them. I told her I would help her. I told her I would record her and transcribe it and put it in the Historical Society archive under her name. She cried when I said it. She said, "You've made it, so my sister doesn't have to be the last word." Ruth Vandermeer brought me a casserole last week. She drove the 2 hours up to Cleveland for no other reason. She sat at my kitchen table and she ate with us and she told Sadie stories about her grandmother. The good stories, the ones I'd never heard. The ones about how my mother once nursed an injured robin back to health in a shoebox in the laundry room and cried when she let it go. Sadie listened with her whole face. I watched my daughter learn about her grandmother from someone other than me, and I felt something inside me untighten that I hadn't known was tight. Theo and I are good. He was patient with me through everything. He still is. He says I'm quieter now than I was before. He doesn't mean it as a criticism. He says it like he likes it. I think he's right. I think I am quieter. I think when you have spent your whole life carrying a low background hum of unmet expectation, and the hum finally stops, you don't know how to fill the silence at first. So you let it stay silent. And after a while, the silence stops being absence and starts being presence. I am promoted now. Senior archivist at the Linden Crossing Historical Society. The promotion came in March. The pay raise is small. The title matters because of what comes with it. I now run the oral history division. I get to decide whose voices we preserve. I get to decide which truths go into the record. I have started a new collection. It's called the Kitchen Tape Project. I am asking women over 60 in our region to come in, on their own time, with no preparation, and record the things they have never said out loud. I tell them no one will hear it for 50 years. I tell them they can speak to me, or to a microphone, or to a room of no one at all. I tell them their daughters and granddaughters will have access to it eventually. I tell them the point is that it exists. 63 women have signed up so far. 63, in a town of 38,000. I had expected maybe 12. The first woman who came in cried for the first 20 minutes. The second woman talked for 4 hours without stopping. The third woman, who is 81, told me a story she said she had never told anyone, including her husband of 58 years. I record them, I transcribe them, I preserve them. I file them under their own names, sealed for 50 years, accessible to direct descendants on written request. I am building, slowly, the archive my mother needed. The one she made for herself, alone, in the dark, on a piece of plastic on her nightstand because no one had built it for her. The speaker is in Sadie's room now. I had to decide what to do with it. And one night, about a month ago, Sadie asked me what it was, and I told her. I told her the truth in the version a 7-year-old could carry. I told her it had belonged to her grandmother. I told her her grandmother had used it when she felt alone. I told her it didn't work anymore the same way, but it still glowed, and sometimes I liked having the glow in the room. Sadie said, "Can it be in my room?" As a nightlight. I said yes. It sits on her bookshelf now. It is no longer connected to anything. I removed it from the account. It cannot record. It cannot listen. It cannot do anything except glow, faintly, blue, when she pushes the button at bedtime. Most nights I tuck her in, and I look at the blue light, and I think about my mother, and I think about my grandmother, and I think about the Women in the Kitchen Tape project. And I think about the line, and how lines break when someone takes the lid off, and I am grateful. Last week, Sadie asked me a question. She was almost asleep. She said, "Mommy, when I grow up, if I'm scared to ask you something, can I just ask it to my speaker?" I sat down on the edge of her bed. I said, "Sadie, listen, you can ask it to the speaker if you need to. I'm not going to take that away, but I want you to know something. I want you to know it now, and I want you to know it when you're 16, and I want you to know it when you're 41. I said, you can ask me out loud. Any question at all. I might not know the answer, I might cry, I might be embarrassed, but I will never be too tired or too proud or too afraid to hear you ask it." I said, "Please don't be like me." And then I caught myself because I had said the sentence, the one my mother had whispered on the bathroom floor when I was 9. The one I had spent 32 years trying to understand. I said it again, differently. I said, "What I mean is, please don't carry it alone. Please don't put it in a tin box. Please don't ask a machine. Please ask me. Please ask anyone. Please just say it out loud." Sadie nodded sleepily. She said, "Okay, Mommy." She said, "I love you." And she said it before goodnight, not after. Not rushed, not embarrassed, just out loud, in the open. The way a sentence is supposed to be said. I used to think the worst thing my mother did was love me from behind a wall. Now I know the worst thing she did was not knowing she was allowed to take the wall down. And the bravest thing she did was leave me the recordings, even if she didn't mean to, so that I would know to take mine down before my own daughter learned to build one. If you are watching this, if you have a parent who loved you in a language you couldn't hear, I want to tell you something. I am not going to tell you to forgive them. I am not going to tell you they did their best. I am going to tell you this. The questions they couldn't ask you to your face, those questions still belong to you. If you ever find them, in a tin box, in a recording, in a letter, in a sentence someone repeats at the funeral, they are yours. You are allowed to hear them. You are allowed to be furious. You are allowed to be tender. You are allowed to take the lid off. Some things you are supposed to know. I would like to ask you something now. I'm going to ask it the way I would have wanted someone to ask my mother. If you found 9 years of recordings your dead parent had made, questions about you, never asked to you, would you listen to all of them or destroy them unheard? There is no right answer. I have changed my own answer 6 times this year. Tell me yours in the comments. I read them. I read every single one. And then, tonight, before you go to bed, call someone you love and ask them the questions you've been carrying. Out loud. Even if you don't get the answer. Especially if you don't. That's the whole point. Out loud.